The veneration of the human head by the Celts is a well-known historical fact. You see, they believed that the head was the vessel that contained the human soul. So today I want to tell you about what's now known as the head of Hendy, and also its followers that venerate this head. And they tell us that they are practicing beliefs of the old religion. The rites and rituals, we're told, were handed down through generations to the local population of the island of Anglesey. And of course Anglesey, once and now known as Annismone, was the last stronghold of the Druids. So let's get into some facts. The Hendy Head was discovered one day in the 1950s by a farmer who was ploughing his field at Hendy on the Isle of Anglesey. It's made of a quartz-rich sandstone and is believed to date back to pre-Roman times and the 1st century or the latter part of the Iron Age. There is one distinguishing feature about this head, and that is a small hole drilled into the corner of its mouth. Now that's not unique with this head. There are many other stone carved heads found throughout Europe with similar holes drilled into the mouths. Now one explanation that's been given for this hole that's been drilled in the mouth is that it's there so that the deity could speak to the people. However, the story that we're given by a certain individual who claimed to be a leading member of this cult tells us of a different purpose. But before I dig too much into that, I want to tell you where this story came from. Now, this story is told to us by Dr. Anne Ross in her book Welsh Folklore. It's the same Anne Ross, the prominent archaeologist and author that wrote this book, which has been a staple on university reading lists for many a decade, and probably still is. Now, I have to be honest, there are some parts of the story that we're told that don't seem to add up completely. Given the status and standing of Anne Ross in the academic world, we just have to assume that there are some things that are either we've not been told or have been left out. So let's hear what Anne Ross says about the Hendy Head. And she tells us that she first heard about the Hendy Head when she was visiting some historical sites on Anglesey, and she was told about this stone carving of a head. And so she decided she'd go off and have a visit and see what this statue was. And so she was given directions, and when she got to her destination, she found the head sitting atop of a wall at bordering Hendy Farm. And she goes into quite a bit of detail telling us just what an effect this head, the first sight of this head had on her. Then she goes on to tell us how unusual it is to find such an artifact that still even today had traditions and rites associated with it. And those rites apparently had been handed down through the generations. Then she tells us about a certain individual, and she calls him the informant. And she tells us that this person was at one time one of the higher ranking members of a cult associated with the head. And apparently this stone carved head formed the centerpiece of a belief system revolving around the god Gwdyion. And for those who don't know who Gwdyion is, well, Gwdyion we find in a lot of the Welsh narratives, most notably in that of the fourth branch of the Mabinogi. And he's the son of the great goddess Don and the brother to Arianod and possibly the father of Lu. He is a magician, so god of the magical arts, and his name, Gwdyion, means born of the trees. And so this cult venerated their head as an image and symbol of the god Gwdyion. He tells us that this belief system was very old and refers to it as the old religion. And he says that you could be initiated into it as a child, and each member of this religion had their own duties that they were to perform. His duties were to learn the proclamations regarding the movement from one place to another through ancient routes. Now, this could be a shamanistic thing, detailing how you would move from one state to that of another. And there's evidence of a transformation or rituals and ceremonies used to help in the process of the transformation of human consciousness from one state to another that date right back through to the Neolithic. So, coming back to the belief system, we're told that Gwdyion had 3 sons, and they were Ego, Echlil, and Gorach. Now, Ego was represented by the stone head. Echlil was associated with the Tylwyth Tegol. For those of you that don't know who the Tylwyth Teg are, then just think of the little people or the fair folk, and I think you'll get the picture. And Gorach was, or he represented the underground or the bottom of the sea. In other words, the underworld. Now, according to their beliefs, they thought that when people died, they didn't just die, but they travelled through a vortex to another world. And in this other world, apparently nobody ever got old or sick, and you could travel backwards and forwards through this vortex by will. Now, coming back to the stone head, we're told that it was used during gatherings, and that each person would take turns in placing a pipe into the hole of the mouth, which contained a scroll, and that scroll basically asked the god for protection even against betrayal, and that's betrayal of the religion. Now, I thought that account was very interesting and was worth bringing to you, as it deserves, I think, some thought and some consideration. But there's a few things that don't add up for me. One part of the story I'd neglected to mention was that, according to tradition, the statue was to remain in place, and every 56 years it was to be moved to a new location. The problem with that is that according to the museum that now houses this piece, is that this statue was only discovered in the 1950s. So if this story is true and they had the head all this time, well, how could that be? Only one thing comes to mind. Where did you find this remarkable piece? Well, I dug it up on the farm. When? Last week. Well, I never. This will have to be taken to the museum where it can be stored and taken care of properly. Well then, right you are. Bugger. Now that's the only thing I can think of that makes any sense. But there may be other people out there that can fill in the gaps, so maybe you've got your own thoughts on this, and if you do, then I'd really like to hear about them, so drop them in the comments down below. And that's it for the Hendy Head, and I'll see you again in another 2 weeks with another episode. And if you've enjoyed today's content, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're not already.